Welcome to 30 Days of Gratitude. We're studying about gratitude in the Psalms, and we've come to day 11 in our series of lessons. We're going to be talking about Psalm 50 and verse number 14. In our previous lesson, we talked about gratitude expressed in song, and we noted how that related back to the first lesson in this series of lessons, gratitude expressed in worship. Well, the second lesson of this series was gratitude is the breath of life. And the lesson that we're going to talk about today is gratitude is foundational. So as we study through and we talk about different things for which we should be grateful and show our gratitude to God, there are also some very powerful and kind of basic lessons in the Psalms about what gratitude is. It is the breath of life. We saw that with David and with Paul, that we ought to live to give thanks to God. But gratitude is also foundational to who we are, foundational to all that we do, to our fellowship and our relationship with God. It's foundational, of course, to our worship. And Psalm 50 will help us to see that. So let's look to the text of Psalm 50, and we're going to start at verse 1 and come down to verse number 14, which is our verse about gratitude, but to look at it and to study it in the context to understand what the Bible teaches concerning gratitude and how gratitude is foundational. So, Psalm 50, beginning in verse number 1. The Bible says, "The mighty God, even the Lord, hath spoken, and called the earth from the rising of the sun unto the going down of the same. The going down thereof. Out of Zion, the perfection of beauty, God hath shined. Our God shall come, and shall not keep silence. A fire shall devour before him, and it shall be very tempestuous round about him. He shall call to the heavens from above, and to the earth, that he may judge his people. Gather my saints together unto me, those that have made a covenant with me by sacrifice. And the heavens shall declare his righteousness, for God is judge himself." The first part of the psalm tells us that God is judge. And notice the picture that's painted for us, the imagery that's given here. You have the picture of the sun rising and shining over the earth from the east to the west, from sunrise to sunset. All over the world, the sun shines. But God is brighter than the sun. And out of Zion, the perfection of beauty, God shines. And it's telling us that God's dominion is over the entire earth. In fact, the entire universe. God rules and God reigns. So God and his majesty and his power, his dominion is shown to us to be universal. That God covers all and rules over all. His power is demonstrated, that when he comes, there's a fire before him and it's tempestuous round about him. God is a God of power. And so his dominion is one that is backed up and supported by his power. And then we also see his authority. It comes from his word, that he will not keep silence, and he's going to call to the heavens from above and to the earth, that he may judge his people, gather them all together, those who've made a covenant with God, and God is judge. And so it's a picture of God calling out to his people, wherever they may be, and bringing them together to hear his word. He's going to make a judgment. So the first picture that's given to us in the psalm is the image of God as judge. So God is judge. The second lesson we learn from this psalm is that giving is insufficient. Just giving by itself is not enough. Listen to what he says. "Hear, O my people, and I will speak, O Israel, and I will testify against thee. I am God, even thy God. I will not reprove thee for thy sacrifices or thy burnt offerings to have been continually before me. I will take no bullock out of thy house, nor he-goats out of thy folds. For every beast of the forest is mine, and the cattle upon 1,000 hills. I know all the fowls of the mountains, and the wild beasts of the field are mine. If I were hungry, I would not tell thee, for the world is mine, and the fullness thereof. Will I eat the flesh of bulls, or drink the blood of goats? Notice what God says here. He first of all says to his people, listen, I'm going to speak. And when God speaks, his people hear and heed his word. We're supposed to. All men should, but there are many who do not. But his people especially know that they should listen when God speaks. And God says, I'm going to speak, and in doing so, I will testify against thee. So it's a court case. God is judge, and now he's presenting the evidence against his people. And what he says, first of all, is that I'm not reproving you for your sacrifices or your burnt offerings that have been continually before me, because they were very good at offering sacrifices and burnt offerings. The problem was not that they were offering sacrifices. The problem was that they were offering sacrifices to God with sinful hearts. They were going through the motions of doing what God said, outwardly obeying his will, but on the inside, they were corrupt. God says, I will take no bullock out of thy house, nor he-goats out of thy fold. You bring them and you offer them to me, but I don't accept them. Not because it was wrong to offer sacrifices, but because they were doing it with the wrong heart, with the wrong motive, with the wrong attitude. They put their trust in the sacrifices. They thought that by doing these actions, they were earning or meriting the favor and the blessing and the salvation of God. And God says, what are you thinking? Do you think that I told you to offer sacrifices because I needed animals? God says, every beast of the forest is mine. If I needed animals, I could just go get them myself because I made them. The cattle on 1,000 hills belong to me, God says. They're mine. I know every bird in the mountains. I know every wild beast in the field. And then he says, if it were a matter of, that I was hungry and you offering these sacrifices is what fed me, God says, if I were hungry, I wouldn't ask you, because you cannot feed God. How can man provide for or supply anything for Jehovah, for God? God says the world is mine and the fullness thereof. If I'm hungry, I can take what I want from it. And then he says, do you think that when you offer these sacrifices that I'm eating the flesh of the bulls or drinking the blood of the goats? You see, that was the pagan, the Gentile, the idolatrer's idea of what their sacrifices were. They were bringing them to support their God. Their God needed food. Their God needed animals. Their God needed these things. And as long as they supplied them, then their God would give them the blessings that they needed. But God says, that's not me. That's not why I asked for animal sacrifices. But his people had come to believe that as long as they did the right actions, it didn't matter what was in their heart. As long as they brought the sacrifices God had commanded, it didn't matter how they treated their neighbor. It didn't matter if they cared for the poor or took care of the widows. It didn't matter, what they were on the inside, how they felt toward God. They could have anger and even hatred toward God in their hearts, but as long as they brought a sacrifice, everything was okay. That's what they thought. And God says, that's not true. Giving is insufficient. We can never give anything that puts God in our debt. There's nothing that we can do, nothing we can say, no works that we can perform, even any obedience that we can give that makes God indebted to us. God commands us to do these things not because he needs something from us, but because he's providing us a way to be reconciled to Him. And in the Old Testament, the animal sacrifices, of course, were painting a picture for what was to come with the sacrifice of Jesus. Now, God is judge. Giving is insufficient. That brings us to our verse about gratitude. And we learn that gratitude is foundational. Here's what God says in verse 14. Offer unto God thanksgiving, and pay thy vows unto the Most High. Call upon me in the day of trouble. I will deliver thee, and thou shalt glorify me. These are foundational. God says, it's not about the animal sacrifices that I'm hungry and I need you to feed me. Yes, they were to offer sacrifices because God commanded it, but it had to come from a right heart. God says, offer unto me thanksgiving. When you bring your sacrifices, come with gratitude. When you obey the commands of God, do it from a heart that's filled with thanksgiving. You're thankful to God for His goodness and His mercy and His provision, that He's made a way available for you and for me, even to approach Him in worship, to come into fellowship with Him through the blood of His Son, to be His people, His children, His family, and to enjoy all the blessings that He offers us. Must we obey the commands of God? Absolutely. But obeying the commands of God alone is mere ritualism, legalism. We obey the commands of God out of a heart of gratitude. We're thankful to God, and therefore we will do what He asks of us. So gratitude is foundational. This passage also teaches us about faithfulness. Pay thy vows unto the Most High. If you make a promise to God, keep it. If you're a Christian, you made a promise to God. When you obeyed the gospel, you confessed, I believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. Paul calls that the good confession, or you profess the good profession. And he says to Timothy that in doing so, we were making a commitment. When I said that Jesus is the Son of God, that meant that He is Lord. And my submission to His will, because He is the Son of God and my Savior, was me saying that I'm going to follow Him. He will be Lord of my life from this moment forward. That's a promise. It's a solemn vow. And I must live up to it, because I love Him and I'm grateful to Him for what He's made possible for me. So keep your vows to the Lord. Faithfulness, gratitude, faithfulness. Then He says, call upon me in the day of trouble. That's submission. That we call upon Him. We admit that we need Him, and we come to Him through prayer. And then He says, I will deliver thee, and thou shalt glorify me. There's submission to God, which of course demands humility of heart, and then there is honor. We trust in God. We admit our dependence upon Him, and when He keeps His promises and when He delivers and He does what He said that He will do, then we glorify Him. We honor Him as God, as true, as faithful, and again, that brings us right back to gratitude. We're grateful for who He is. So never forget that gratitude is foundational. Do I need to be baptized for the remission of my sins? Yes. But it's not just the act of baptism that saves. If that's all that were involved, we could just take people against their will and, dunk them in the water and they would be saved. But it's not about just the act. It's about the attitude and the heart that goes into the obedience. And that's true after we obey the gospel, after we become Christians. Do we have to worship every first day of the week? We do. But it's not a matter of have to. It's a matter of I want to, because I'm grateful to God. And so when I sing out of gratitude. When I give out of gratitude. When I participate in the Lord's Supper, in the preaching and the teaching, the prayers, it all comes from a heart filled with thankfulness to God. And so it's not just the actions, but the attitude, spirit and in truth, John 4:24. And that's what the Lord was teaching his people back here in Psalm 50, that gratitude is foundational. And it's foundational to your life and to mine as well. We ought to be grateful to God for all of his wonderful blessings. We ought to be grateful to him to the point that we will obey his commandments. We'll do what he asks of us because he is God, because he is good, because he loves us, because he's made salvation available to us. And we are so grateful and so thankful to him that we devote our lives to obeying whatever he commands. We trust and we obey because we're thankful, because we're grateful, and we express that to God in our daily lives. Everything that we do has to be built on that foundation of gratitude. And I hope that it is in your life, and we work on it in our own lives to try to be grateful in everything so that God will be pleased and honored by our lives and by our service. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate you being a part of this series and hope that you'll come back and be with us again as we continue to study about gratitude in the book of Psalms.